Global markets are reeling. Is a recession looming? Economic battles are intensifying, with Germany, France, and Denmark delivering a blow that could shake the American automotive industry to its core. Europe is renowned for exporting exquisite French wines, elegant Italian fashion, and high-quality Irish butter to the United States. However, for Germany, the automotive industry is a vital sector that appears to be on the verge of facing significant challenges. Following the implementation of substantial tariffs by U.S. President Donald Trump, global financial markets are once again experiencing a downturn. Stock exchanges across Asia plummeted at the start of the new trading week, sparking fears of a potential global recession. Germany, France, and Denmark have taken steps that have disrupted the plans of American automotive giants. New regulations, ranging from stringent environmental standards to complex customs procedures, have suddenly reduced the competitiveness of American cars in the European market. The fact that the U.S. automotive industry, valued at approximately $1.5 trillion, is facing such serious challenges is a cause for concern not only for automakers and their employees but also for the overall health of the global economy. The automotive industry has long served as an engine of technological progress, shaping supply chains and influencing international relations among many nations. However, the current situation calls into question the America First policies promoted by the Trump administration. The recent actions of Germany, France, and Denmark pose a real threat to reducing American car exports and diminishing their competitiveness, causing serious concern in U.S. government circles. The question arises, will these events lead to a radical transformation of the American automotive industry or mark the beginning of a new trade war? Will American companies, especially those that have been slow to transition to electric vehicles, be able to adapt quickly to tightening environmental standards? Otherwise, they face losing the European market and experiencing severe economic shocks. Competition is intensifying, and only those who can offer innovative and environmentally friendly solutions will survive. In the escalating dispute over measures to combat the climate crisis and competition in the automotive industry, opinions are divided. Is it Europe, striving for environmental leadership, or the U.S., concerned about fair competition? To understand this issue, it is worth recalling the former glory of the American automotive industry. Detroit, the cradle of Ford and General Motors, has long been a symbol of technological progress and manufacturing power. For a century, the U.S. dominated the automotive industry in terms of both production volume and innovation. However, time does not stand still. European companies, especially German ones, have surged ahead technologically. German engineers have earned a reputation as innovators in engine technology, leaders in the luxury car segment, and masters of impeccable assembly. France, in turn, is increasingly attracting attention with its design and, more importantly, its environmentally conscious approach to automotive manufacturing. Denmark, a country with a relatively modest economy, stands out due to its vigorous policies in the field of green, energy, and sustainable development. There is now increasing talk that the three European powers have concluded some kind of agreement, including a series of rules and policy steps that could seriously restrict the American automotive market. According to some experts, what is happening presents a complex picture that cannot be assessed solely based on economic benefits. There are suggestions that this may be an attempt to push American cars out of the market under the pretext of environmental regulations and standards. Others argue that this is a real trade war, a clear example of how Europe is uniting, erecting barriers to American goods. In the United States itself, the protectionist and nationalist economic policies actively promoted by Donald Trump during his presidency still find support in certain circles. Trump repeatedly raised the issue of tariffs and trade relations with Europe, expressing dissatisfaction that German cars occupied too large a share of the American market. Analysts have been prescient, predicting the inevitable tightening of European policies to protect their own economic interests. The question remains open as to whether the actions of Germany, France, and Denmark align with pan-European values or reflect purely national ambitions. However, it's evident that new environmental standards and German incentives for electric vehicles, French support for local production and European supply chains, and stringent Danish requirements for carbon footprint are creating significant obstacles for American manufacturers. In particular, the substantial size and high fuel consumption traditionally associated with American cars clash sharply with the burgeoning European environmental movement. Moreover, American companies seeking to export their products to Europe may face new tax barriers, complex testing procedures, and the need to obtain additional certificates of conformity. The perception of Donald Trump as a politician sometimes losing his way is reflected in his management style. During his presidency, he repeatedly stated the unfair distribution of benefits between the U.S. and Europe, calling for a revision of conditions in the automotive industry. Tariff disputes with European countries were a central topic of discussion, and although the threat of restrictions on car exports from Germany loomed over the situation, the parties never reached a concrete agreement. Today, American automakers are anxious about the German government's view of gasoline and diesel engine cars as outdated technologies, striving for an ecological transformation. Many models exported to Europe by giants like Ford and General Motors will require significant investment in research and development to meet the new emission standards that the European Union plans to introduce in the coming years. Without the necessary investment, American cars may be denied permission to be sold in critical markets like Germany. In France, a policy of protectionism is gaining momentum, prioritizing domestic industry. Brands such as Peugeot, Citroën, and Renault could benefit significantly from government support or even pan-European protection measures. At the same time, American automakers express concerns about new regulatory barriers and additional taxes in France. Paris, striving for ambitious goals in transportation electrification and with the support of the European Commission, may pass laws that further restrict the position of cars with internal combustion engines. This, in turn, will make SUVs and pickups from the U.S. with their powerful gasoline engines virtually uncompetitive in the European market. Thus, the prospect of paralysis of the American automotive industry is no longer a far-fetched threat but a very real one. And while Denmark may not be mentioned in the news as often as Germany and France, this country stands out for its uncompromising policies in green energy and sustainable development. The Copenhagen authorities are striving for a radical reduction in the carbon footprint from road transport and plan to bring emissions to zero. Measures under consideration include a direct ban on the operation of cars with internal combustion engines after a certain period and economic incentives to switch to environmentally friendly transport through a system of increased taxation. Denmark is actively promoting these initiatives at the European Union level, which could create severe challenges for automakers, especially for American companies whose products traditionally feature large engine displacement and high fuel consumption. With tightening environmental standards, American cars with internal combustion engines may become uncompetitive in the European market. At the same time, American-made electric vehicles, such as Tesla, are in a strong position. However, the overall trend creates tangible difficulties for the American automotive industry, which is focused on producing high-emission vehicles. The automotive industry, with its colossal turnover of $1.5 trillion, is not just an economic sector but a complex ecosystem that affects the interests of many people and companies. The automotive industry, like a giant mechanism, drives millions of lives, from steelworkers and metallurgists to autopilot developers, component manufacturers, and fuel suppliers. In the United States, this sector has served as a reliable source of jobs for decades and has replenished the coffers of states and the federal budget through export operations. However, today, as European countries such as Germany, France, and Denmark introduce restrictions under the banner of the Green Revolution, or, perhaps, seeking to protect their industrial interests, American car manufacturers are sounding the alarm. We can't just give up the European export market, they say. While some companies are starting to look towards China or South America, Europe's geopolitical importance and high purchasing power make its loss particularly painful. It is likely that American automakers will actively lobby for a reasonable transition period or, at least, a smoother pace of implementation of European standards. However, given the growing environmental awareness of European society and concerns about climate change, the prospects for success of these lobbying efforts appear very bleak. Observers are understandably surprised by the fact that the Trump administration faced unexpected resistance on the European front. Initially, Washington expected to extract a number of benefits from trade relations with Europe. It was assumed that by putting pressure on European countries on defense spending within NATO and criticizing the foreign trade surplus of, for example, Germany, it would be possible to open European markets to American goods. However, faced with a firm statement that the automotive industry is a cornerstone of the European economy, European leaders went on the counterattack, defending their own interests. The second disappointment for the Trump team was related to hopes for increased supplies of American liquefied natural gas to Europe. The calculation was based on the fact that this would support demand for powerful cars. But these plans were not destined to come true, as Europe firmly embarked on the path of reducing its carbon footprint. Moreover, the green energy revolution, pioneered by Denmark, has progressed much further in Europe than in the United States. As a result, instead of the expected strengthening of American influence, the opposite effect occurred. It remains unclear whether this is the result of a coordinated European strategy developed jointly by Germany, France, and Denmark, or simply a coincidence when each country independently adopted national plans at the same time. In the modern world, a serious struggle is unfolding for the future of the automotive industry, where a group of countries, united under the banner of the Green Bloc, seeks to send the internal combustion engine to the scrap heap of history. The European Commission is actively developing a range of measures aimed at ensuring that cars completely stop polluting the environment by 2035. While European automakers are making titanic efforts to adapt to the coming changes, their American counterparts are noticeably lagging behind. It's not just about customs duties, but also about using standards and regulations as a powerful weapon. To get into the European market, a car must pass the most stringent environmental and safety tests, and its carbon dioxide emissions must meet strict limits. American manufacturers face a difficult choice: either develop special models for Europe, which will require huge investments in research and development, or risk losing the European market. Thus, the U.S. automotive industry, traditionally considered a world leader, finds itself facing a serious dilemma imposed on it by Europe. This situation is expected to have a significant impact on the internal politics of the United States, reminiscent of the times when automotive issues played an important role in presidential campaigns. Donald Trump, known for his sharp statements, has repeatedly accused Europe of unfair trade policies, finding a response from some of his supporters. However, the European side retorts that their actions are aimed solely at protecting the climate and the environment, and not at discriminating against anyone. The Danish experience shows that even European automakers face difficulties due to strict environmental standards. Despite this, European countries are confident that the green transition will bring significant economic and social benefits in the future, and do not intend to abandon their chosen course. To reduce the issue to simple protectionism in favor of European automakers would be too simplistic. In reality, it is about combating the climate crisis, achieving carbon neutrality, and preparing European industry for the challenges of the future. American automakers, in turn, express concerns that they are not ready for such rapid changes. They argue that Europe is using the situation to its advantage, creating favorable conditions for the development of its own automotive brands. The prospect of imminent demise for the U.S. automotive industry, estimated at a colossal $1.5 trillion, is certainly not a matter for the immediate future. However, alarm bells are already ringing, indicating a potential inability of American auto giants to compete in the European market. Moreover, there is a risk of declining export figures on a global scale. If the market share for American companies decreases by 50 to 60% in the long term, they may face the harsh reality of plant closures or forced mergers. Such a scenario would inevitably affect the vast network of suppliers and subcontractors engaged in the production of automotive components. Some analysts believe that the United States can prevent a negative scenario by accelerating the transition to green technologies. This means that automakers need to support the momentum set by electric vehicle industry pioneers like Tesla. Abandoning internal combustion engines and reorienting towards the production of electric and hybrid models that meet European market requirements is becoming a key factor for survival. However, such a transformation requires a radical change in mindset and significant investments in new infrastructure. If American companies, historically relying on traditional engine and transmission production, are slow to adapt to the new realities, the European market may be irretrievably lost to them. The influence of stringent regulatory measures, such as those in Europe, is felt not only in Europe but also in major markets like China and Japan, indicating a global trend towards stricter environmental and industrial standards. The Trump administration's confusion regarding these trends highlights an important diplomatic aspect. While the United States expects greater support and increased military spending from its European allies, especially within NATO, Europe is increasingly pursuing its own policies aimed at protecting its industry and promoting its own interests. Such a divergence of courses can be seen as a symptom of a deepening rift in transatlantic relations. Despite both sides continuing to declare a strategic partnership, economic contradictions, differences in environmental standards, and technological competition are increasingly becoming a source of tension. Germany and France, as leading powers of the European Union, have significant influence and can ensure compliance with their political directives throughout the EU. Denmark, although a small country, plays an important role as a determined voice of European environmental advocates. If the United States underestimates the growing pressure from these forces, American companies risk completely losing access to the European market, which will have serious economic consequences. It is impossible to predict with certainty which path the automotive industry will choose in the future. If the European strategy of supporting environmentally friendly and domestically produced cars proves successful, European automakers may become global leaders in electric and environmentally friendly transportation. If the American commitment to large cars persists, the country risks losing its share of global markets. However, the possibility of a gradual tightening of environmental standards in the U.S. domestic market cannot be ruled out. The global climate crisis is an objective reality, and more cities in America are introducing new rules to protect the environment. If such a transformation is inevitable, American automotive giants may face significant financial losses by missing the opportunity to adapt. On the other hand, thanks to a strong entrepreneurial environment and a developed high-tech sector, the U.S. has a chance to make a breakthrough in the development of promising electric or autonomous vehicles. Therefore, it is premature to say that American manufacturers are doomed to failure. The decisive actions of Germany, France, and Denmark in the field of regulation have essentially forced American manufacturers to take a defensive position on the world stage. Now the key question is, how will the Trump administration respond to this challenge? The arsenal of retaliatory measures includes new tariffs against European goods or, for example, taxing imports of cars from the EU. However, such an escalation risks escalating into a full-scale trade war that will harm both sides. It should not be forgotten that German cars occupy a significant share of the American market. Unleashing a chain of mutual restrictions is fraught with serious consequences for the global economy, which has not yet recovered from the pandemic. Unemployment may rise and global economic growth may stagnate. In this situation, Denmark and France might have shown greater caution, fearing a strong economic reaction from the United States, but they are unlikely to abandon their ambitious goals in the field of environmental protection. The bureaucratic apparatus of the European Union is known to be averse to repealing enacted laws. On the contrary, it tends to implement them consistently. A trade confrontation is looming on the horizon. Germany, France, and Denmark, as if in collusion, are creating significant obstacles to the export of American automobiles. This involves not only customs formalities but also a carefully crafted strategy encompassing technological standards, environmental regulations, and pricing parameters. The U.S. automotive industry, facing the prospect of paralysis, is already sounding the alarm. This turn of events has caught the American president off guard. He clearly did not expect such a swift and coordinated response from Europe. Behind the scenes, there is growing talk that what is happening is nothing less than a declaration of European independence. In recent years, the European Union has demonstrated a desire to strengthen its position on the world stage, becoming less susceptible to pressure from the United States in strategically important areas such as energy, high technology, defense, and now automotive manufacturing. In response, the United States is expressing dissatisfaction, arguing that the stringent environmental requirements imposed by Europeans are effectively becoming a powerful trade barrier. It remains to be seen whether this confrontation will lead to further escalation or whether the parties will sit down at the negotiating table to work out a compromise solution. However, one thing is clear, automakers cannot instantly restructure their production processes to suit political expediency. Lengthy planning cycles have caused American automakers to raise concerns. Adapting to strict European emission standards or relocating some production to European territory are projects requiring multi-billion-dollar investments. That is why the actions of Germany, France, and Denmark cannot be underestimated. By paving the way for larger-scale environmental initiatives by the European Union, these countries are increasing fears that American automakers will find it more difficult to export their products as before. Perhaps the disarray caused by Trump's reaction is a political misstep, but the panic in American business circles seems quite justified. The automotive industry is already in the process of technological transformation, and for companies that have profited for years from producing large, gas-guzzling cars, The sudden shift to environmentally friendly electric vehicles is a costly and complex task. If the European market closes to competition in this process, American manufacturers could face serious losses. The European Union provides strong support to German automotive brands such as Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes, as well as French giants Peugeot and Renault, enabling them to rapidly develop in the field of next-generation clean vehicles. If the American market is not ready for such changes, the United States risks falling significantly behind both domestically and in export capabilities. As a result, the assertion of a $1.5 trillion paralysis of the U.S. automotive industry may seem like an exaggeration, but it is not without basis. This process will not happen instantly, but under the current circumstances, the American automotive industry will certainly gradually lose ground in the competition with Europe and risks being left behind in the long term if it does not take decisive strategic steps. Such a development could be an unpleasant surprise for Trump, who probably expected Europe to follow his instructions without question. Instead, he was faced with a powerful environmental and protectionist bloc. Attacks from Germany, France, and Denmark could form an even more effective barrier if other countries of the European Union join them. The U.S. automotive industry stands on the threshold of change, and the future appears highly uncertain. One possible path forward is to begin negotiations on a new trade deal between the United States and the European Union. American automakers, recognizing the need to adapt to changing conditions, may make concessions on environmental standards and emissions to produce models that are more in demand in the European market. In turn, Europe, seeking to avoid a major trade war, could provide American companies with certain customs or administrative benefits. However, implementing such a scenario will require painstaking diplomatic work, the outcome and timing of which remain unclear. An alternative is to reorient the American automotive industry towards the domestic market and Asian countries, which would effectively mean withdrawal from the European arena. However, such a move will inevitably lead to job losses in the U.S. and increased competition in the global market. Time will tell which of these paths will prove preferable. One thing is clear: the actions of Germany, France, and Denmark have already caused a wide resonance in American political and business circles, not leaving even Donald Trump indifferent. Against the backdrop of transformations changing the face of Europe, the American auto industry may face a prolonged period of adaptation. Time will tell how deep this crisis will be. The question is whether the European green initiatives will have enough power to seriously undermine the position of the U.S. auto industry. Will American auto giants be able to show flexibility, rebuild, and maintain competitiveness in the global arena? And one more important aspect: was the so-called Trump surprise a conscious tactic in foreign policy, or was it the result of miscalculations and an unexpected defeat? We invite readers to share their thoughts and forecasts in the comments, deepening the discussion around these important issues. Stay with us, subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss fresh analytical materials about transformations in industry and the vicissitudes of international trade wars. Thank you for your attention, and see you soon.